Introducing the U Rules of Value from Burger King. And U Rule number 1, you choose food you actually want. There's 7 tasty options, so try the $5 duo or $7 trio. Choose your deal. Price and participation vary. U.S. only. No substitutions. Restrictions apply.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the politics podcast that's more come in, the kettle's on, than give us your Rolex, day out, the drawbridge is up. I'm Naomi Smith.
And I'm Kenny Campbell.
We're here to analyse, empathise, and when we inevitably hit the limits of human knowledge, improvise.
All while giving you practical steps to take back just a smidgen of control in this increasingly baffling political landscape.
So pop your thermals on, crank the volume up, and help us spark another Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot.
Hello, and welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Kenny.
And I'm Naomi. Alex, drumroll, is having an extremely overdue and much-needed fallow week out on the pasture.
Yay.
If you're listening, Alex, we miss you lots and lots and lots.
I assume that he's off because Greece failed to qualify for the World Cup finals, despite beating Scotland the other day, while Scotland only went and flipping qualified for the first time this century. And listen, a shout out to Wales as well for scoring 7 last night in Cardiff against North Macedonia and boosting their chances of making the finals too. But yay!
Well done, Scotland.
Yeah, indeed. Anyhow, enough with the unbridled Celtic joy. In Alex's absence, this week we're picking over the corpse of Britain's human rights legislation, trying to puzzle out where Labour's strategy is actually headed, and separating the why from the WTF.
And because justice delayed is genuinely justice denied, we're diving into the courts, the cases, and even the crumbling concrete. So who better to bring back to the show than the Evening Standard's courts correspondent, Tristan Kirk. Welcome back, Tristan.
Hello there. Thanks for having me on again.
Tristan, you're a bit echoey. Where are you at the moment?
I'm actually talking to you from the Old Bailey in central London, from my office.
Do you have a collective noun, like the lobby do in Parliament? What are the court journalists known as?
A troublesome of journalists.
Yes, excellent.
Troublesome of court journalists. I'll have that one. Tristan, as someone who lives in the courts, obviously more than most defendants, how's the courtroom concrete holding up where you are then?
Well, recently I was looking at the outside of Harrow Crown Court in northwest London, which is currently closed, surrounded by scaffolding. It's been shut since summer 2023. Much like most government projects, it's just gone backwards, the reopening, for another 4 months. So that was crumbling concrete in the roof of Harrow Crown Court that's going to, by the end of it, taken them the best part of 3 years to fix. It's just one very small corner of the disaster across the criminal justice system.
Well, let's hope it's not like Hammersmith Bridge and gets mothballed entirely, because the last thing we need is another closed court.
Yeah, well, we've already voluntarily closed quite a lot of courts, so being forced into shut down ones that we really could do with right now is not ideal. They've been spreading the cases far and wide around London to try and cope with it, but frankly, like the ceiling, everything's at breaking point.
Well, it sounds like we better shake a leg before the roof crumbles in on your head, Tristan. I'm getting quite worried for your health and well-being.
Quiet Riot. Life comes at you fast when you're Keir Starmer. First it was Andy Burnham hunting him down. Then last week he was fighting off a challenge someone on his own team seemed to have started from Health Secretary Wes Streeting. This week, enter Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood, who's grabbing the headlines from her beleaguered leader and definitely pitch rolling for the top job herself. But wait, what's this? Even as we record, there are new flames flickering from the direction of Camp Burnham, with Labour MP and Quiet Riot favourite Clive Lewis saying he'd consider gifting Burnham, if it is even in his gift, his Norwich South seat to help secure a leadership bid for Andy Burnham in the interests of the country. On Monday, Starmer had a big piece in the Mirror. He did a sit-down interview with Lizzie Buchan, proclaiming that the cost of living is the only thing that matters, and that his focus is squarely on putting more pounds in people's pockets. He told the newspaper, "Let me be really clear. Every minute, that's not spent talking about and dealing with the cost of living is a minute wasted of the political work of this government. Every minute, Keir? It seems Shabana Mahmood did not get that memo. The very same day, she unveiled a sweeping overhaul of asylum laws, critiquing how courts interpret the European Convention of Human Rights and promising tougher deportations. Here she is, setting out her stall on Sunday.
This is a moral mission for me. I can see that illegal migration is creating division across our country. I can see that it is polarising communities across the country. I can see that it is dividing people and making them estranged from one another. I don't want to stand back and watch that happen in my country. What is happening with our illegal migration system is this is a broken system. It's not right-wing talking points or fake news or misinformation that is suggesting that we've got a problem. I know, because I have now seen this system inside out. It is a broken system. We have a genuine problem to fix. People are angry about something that is real.
So here's the question. Are we watching one party with two leadership figures pulling in different directions, or maybe even more than two? One banking on bread and butter economics, the other embracing hardline control and law and order culture wars. And if so, should we be getting the popcorn ready for a May leadership dust-up between Mahmood and Streeting? And what about Camp Burnham? What indeed? Welcome to WTF Labour. Let's dig in. And first, let's look at Shabana Mahmood. Kenny, you're a comms guy. I mean, of course, Tristan, you are too. You're both long-toothed, brilliant journalists. And so surely you're looking at the split between Starmer's messaging and Mahmood's agenda on Monday. You have the PM doing a sit-down interview with a national newspaper saying the only thing we should be talking about is getting the cost of living down. And then you've got the Home Secretary doing a really major intervention on asylum law in the UK.
It's amateur hour again, isn't it? You don't have the Prime Minister doing a big set-piece interview with an outlet like the Mirror clashing with a huge announcement by the Home Secretary, particularly when they seem to be at odds in terms of what it is that we should all be focusing on, what it is that the voters should all be demanding of their MPs. I sound like a stuck record, but yet again, there's definitely a comms side to this. And, you know, the Home Secretary's announcement would have been well planned in advance. The Mirror stuff, look, you've got flexibility when you're the Prime Minister and you're giving a national newspaper an exclusive of some sort. You don't have to set it up to clash with your own Home Secretary. So there's definitely an issue there, which has probably been amplified by the fact that Westminster is now smelling blood. And I think that's obviously the bigger issue, far beyond the fact that Starmer is wanting us to talk about the cost of living. Meanwhile, Mahmood is leaning into culture wars. But it's the fact, the taste of blood in the air already.
What I found striking was, not 2 months ago at Labour Party conference, you had minister after minister talking about defending the ECHR, that of course it's not up for negotiation, that yes, we might be looking at bits of it, taking some legal advice. But you had the Attorney General, Richard Hermer, really stridently defending it. And then, of course, you have a Prime Minister with a background as a human rights lawyer, steeped in defending all of those protections that things like the ECHR offer everyone in the country. So what I found staggering was not only this issue of the PM doing a sit-down interview on a completely different topic and making that topic the number one topic on the day that, of course, the world's media was focused on what Mahmood was talking about in Parliament in terms of changing our asylum law and controlling our borders, but that neither Starmer nor the official number 10 Downing Street Twitter account mentioned what the Home Secretary was doing. 4 days of complete silence on that issue from them. In fact, no content went out from them for 4 days. The last tweet Starmer had done was about celebrating the King's birthday. So then that reinforced to me that he doesn't love this either, that he is maybe Prime Minister in name only, if that is true, because this is a huge intervention creeping into reforms territory. He gets the backing of Kemi Badenoch to get it through Parliament. We've got Tommy Robinson saying the Overton window has been shifted totally in our direction. Thank you very much. And meanwhile, Farage continues to grin from ear to ear, and Labour's polling rating has not changed at all this week. It's flatlined. Certainly they haven't got a boost from it. And so it is just staggering to me that we've had 15 months of terrible comms coming out of Number 10, mishandling things left, right and centre. And now we seem to almost have two completely separate comms operations. And I just don't know what the hell is going on.
One of the great truisms in my experience with dealing with comms within companies and within politics is that when somebody comes to you with a communications problem, more often than not, it's not actually a communications problem. It's a symptom of a bigger issue further up the chain of command. And the communications team are being asked to do things that are either inappropriate, wrong, or they're being failed, that they're just not getting the instructions that they should be getting. And all the signs are there that Labour is struggling with this very set of symptoms.
Now, this being such a justice-focused episode, talk us through why the ECHR is featuring so strongly in the story this week around changes to UK asylum law.
Well, Mahmood's accused the courts of what she calls an expanding interpretation of Article 8 of the ECHR, which is around the right to family life, that she says blocks the removal of refused destinees. So she's positioning Labour as willing to curb human rights protections in the name of border control. It's not a drifting to the right, it's a clear, deliberate and very, very, very significant step to the right by a Labour Home Secretary.
And of course, when we left the EU, we remained members of the Council of Europe, and we are signed up to the ECHR. And the Council of Europe General Secretary Alain Berset announced, I think just a few weeks ago, that actually the Council of Europe is reviewing and potentially updating and adapting human rights law. So my question is why we, as the UK, are doing it unilaterally when the whole thing's going to be reviewed anyway. I don't know if either of you have got a view on that. Is it purely sort of panic about reform surge? Is it a genuine commitment to secure the borders because they feel that was part of their election promise? And if so, why now and not sort of waiting and leading within the Council of Europe on some of the changes that are needed? And, they've referenced Denmark considerably during the press operation around all of this and pointing to Denmark as, having shown them the way to do it. Why do we still, post Boris Johnson, position the UK as exceptionalist rather than wanting to be part of a greater coalition of liberal democracies that are all about, the international rule of law and upholding human rights?
I think that there's two things that have gone on here. The first is that we've rather ceded a lot of our authority within European circles with Brexit, and there's no getting away from that our voice isn't as powerful anymore. The second thing is that, like you were talking about Labour's terrible comms operation, is that they basically ceded control of the debate, certainly over the summer, and for a significant period of time, not doing anything and letting things run wild. I noticed in the past months, there was a concerted effort within some right-wing politicians and aided by the newspapers to present a picture of the kinds of court cases that were being dealt with, basically cherry-picking cases where somebody had appealed against a decision to do with asylum or refugee status, and where a judge had made a decision that could then be painted as in some way ridiculous or out of step with what people actually think. And if you looked at the newspaper articles that appeared as a mass, it was a compelling picture of of a court system that had gone wrong, essentially, day after day after day. Judges were making these odd decisions that nobody would agree with. And in that context, then you would turn around and say, yeah, fine, maybe we need to look at a change. But actually, when you go back and look at what was being reported, it was either heavily sidelined in the copy, or it wasn't mentioned at all. These were cases that were pulled out of the archives, sort of,
Right.
15, 18 months ago, a case, and it was reported as if it had just happened. It's a concerted effort to build a narrative, and you can only do that when the other side or the government has basically left the field of play and allowed this argument to run wild. And then you end up with with the argument that we used to be a minority voice that we should pull out of the ECHR. Once you've allowed this narrative to run, then that seems like an obvious conclusion to more people, and then you end up moving yourself into to that area to come up with policies that we're now seeing come forward.
And we've had no narrative around why the ECHR is a good thing from government. All we've heard is Article 8 has been, the interpretation of it has been expanded too far. We're going to tighten it up. And that will allow us to take control of our borders because it will act as this deterrent. People won't be able to bring their children in the hope of an easy ride of seeking asylum. But no, and this is exactly what I would expect from a Labour government, is for them to go out and champion human rights and all of the wonderful protections that the ECHR has offered, thousands of Brits over the years that we've been signed up to it. I want to also ask you about backlog, because we're going to be talking about backlog in the domestic criminal justice system, but we know full well that the Home Office has this inordinate backlog of asylum claims. And since the announcement on Monday, I've heard many an asylum expert on the news saying, the Home Secretary now saying that those who do qualify and are successful at having their asylum application granted will then have to reapply every few years, and that is only going to add to this mammoth backlog of applications. And so this kind of constipated pipeline that we've already got is then going to have a Big Mac meal dolloped on top of it every day.
Yeah, I think you're right to bring up backlogs, because it's the unsexy answer to some of the problems is to create a functioning justice and courts and tribunals system. But it would actually do an enormous amount of good if we had something like that, because you can imagine if somebody came into the country illegally, with the incentives that has for them, if it became obvious and known that you will go through a tribunal system where your claim will be dealt with pretty quickly, then you would then focus the mind on anybody who's coming here needs to have something that's going to convince a court that they can actually stay. Otherwise, it's not really worth the trouble making the trip in the first place. But yeah, and in terms of changing the system, there is I think a significant risk of the backlog getting worse and the system just become jammed up with people making claims. And that's how you end up with so many people being put up in hotels and HMOs and the like. And that's what people see and don't like, because that's massive expense. Behind that is a broken system that nobody in the public necessarily wants to look at.
I'd like to pick up on something you mentioned, Naomi, a few minutes ago. You mentioned the focus that there had been on Denmark and the way Denmark has progressed its socialist politics. Denmark had a whole bunch of elections this week, and there were some really, really quite stark warnings for Labour from the results of these elections, because the Social Democrats over there, who have been in control in Copenhagen for, I think, more than 100 years, they had a huge fall in support. Now, they're still the biggest municipal party in Denmark, but they dropped about 5 percentage points in the elections. Among the reasons being cited for the substantial decline in Copenhagen were voter fatigue over the Prime Minister's hardline policies on issues such as integration and immigration. And those are the policies which have partly inspired the newly unveiled asylum and migration policy in Britain. So in other words, our Home Secretary may well be nailing her colours to the mast of a boat that is slipping under the waves in other parts of Europe. And I think she should be very, very concerned about that. It's not a set of policies that are going to appeal to a huge swathe of Labour voters. And in other countries with similar parties, the warning signs are there. You're playing with fire when you do this sort of thing.
And this is the bit I don't get. And when I heard about it all on Monday morning and had been waiting for the actual detail before commenting, my instinctive reaction was obviously abject horror, because I'm a great internationalist who thinks that if we hadn't cut foreign aid, we wouldn't have half the problem that we've got. If we hadn't left the EU, we would still be part of the Dublin Convention and able to, repatriate people much more easily and quickly. And we could, have far fewer small boat crossings that were barely a thing while we were still in the EU. However, I was really struck that this was framed as a kind of politics of compromise when it is not. Tristan is exactly right. It is the position of being compromised by ceding the debate to the right, by trying to park your tanks on their lawn and failing, because you can never satiate the radical right. They will always want more, and they will never thank particularly a Labour government for any hardline move they do. They will just shift the goalposts further towards their direction. And all of the data from the British election study, which is the gold standard of looking at where votes are going, is evident. Labour are losing the vast majority of their support to don't know Liberal Democrats, and increasingly in urban areas, the Green Party, and only about 8 to 10% of it to Reform. Yet we heard defender of the Mahmood plan after defender of the Mahmood plan saying, we are losing too many votes to Reform. We've got to stop that. We've got to give people what they want. And it's not going to help them. And so my question to the Labour Party is, what the hell are you going to do next when the polls don't shift as a consequence of doing this?
Yeah.
So that brings me back to your point, Kenny, about whether she is creating a rod for her own back if she does want to go for a leadership challenge. Is there a case that maybe the Blairites, who of course never wanted Keir Starmer, he was, as Alex often says on the show, was meant to be the caretaker in opposition, sort the party out, rid it of, pesky trots and help it become more electable, then pass the baton on over to somebody like Wes Streeting, who could then, after Boris Johnson's expected second or third term, get elected as the next Labour Prime Minister. So could the Blairites sort of be seeing this Mahmood misstep that will be deeply unpopular with the Labour Party members as a way to boost his chances with those members, because he could probably get through the PLP, but he would have a harder time getting past the membership? Where do you think we're at, Kenny, in terms of a Mahmood Streeting battle in waiting occurring next year?
It's quite a believable narrative, this. I mean, Mahmood setting out her stall for the right of the party, Streeting much more...
I mean, I don't know about the right, because I would put her more in the blue Labour camp and Streeting on the right. That would be how I would sort of frame them if I was trying to get my head around criminology.
And there's the battle, because Mahmood's announcement at the beginning of this week was very definitely pitched at a right-of-centre audience, wasn't it?
On social issues. So I guess it's on the economic versus social. You've got a more socially liberal Blairite wing that are more right-wing on the economics, and then the blue Labour wing who are more socially conservative, but probably slightly more in favour of high spend.
But then we have, whispering in from Manchester, Andy Burnham, who brings a different set of politics to the table.
And has very few routes ahead of him. And this is why I think he partly stalled in his, was it or wasn't it a leadership bid going into the Labour Party conference. What is the route to him becoming an MP and therefore eligible to stand in a leadership race? Because I cannot see at the moment many seats where Labour could win a by-election right now. So first of all, he's got to resign as mayor, because they've changed the rules. You can't do both jobs at once. That would cause a by-election for Manchester mayor, which again could be a difficult one for Labour. Probably less difficult than it would be for a parliamentary seat, and then he's got to win a by-election. Now, interesting spot. I'll give the hat tip to the deputy poll-ed at the Mirror, Ashley Coburn, who spotted Clive Lewis on Politics Live when Vicky Young asked him would he give up his seat so that Andy Burnham could run. And he basically said, yes, let's have a little listen.
Is Andy Burnham up for this?
You have to ask Andy Burnham.
Have you spoken to him?
I have spoken to Andy Burnham, yeah.
But I'm not sure if he wants to move to Norwich, but would you would you give up your seat
It's
for
a
him?
question I've asked myself, and I'd have to obviously consult with my wife as well and family. But you know what? If I'm going to sit here and say, country before party, party for personal ambition, then yes, I have to say yes, don't I?
You give up your seat for Andy Burnham?
I would, yeah.
Wow, OK. We'll get him on the phone.
Kenny, lots of people are kind of curious as to why Clive Lewis hasn't already defected to become the 5th Green Party MP. Would not the Greens have quite a good chance of winning Norwich South if he were to leave and create a vacancy for Andy Burnham?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't bet money on any electoral outcomes at the moment in Labour seats in that part of the world. It's a very high-risk approach. And the other part of this is very high risk, of course, is that mixed messaging now at its core is going to be confusing voters. They're going to be hearing, we're going to put money in your pocket and bread on your table, and simultaneously they're going to be hearing from other politicians of government, we're going to crack down on asylum and legal protections. It's one of these positions that risks alienating both sides, both those who are economically anxious and that slug of Labour progressive voters who do give a damn about human rights. And it all adds to the idea, and it all adds fuel to the risk of internal party rebellion. I don't think there's... I would not feel comfortable, let me put it like that, if it was my job to make a call on what happens in Norwich South.
Quiet riot. If we knew more about our sleep, what would we do differently? Would we go to bed at a consistent time or take steps to reduce interruptions to our sleep? With the all-new Sleep Score, Apple Watch measures your bedtime consistency, interruptions, and sleep duration. Then, every morning it combines these factors into an easy-to-understand score from 1 to 100. So you'll know how to take the quality of your sleep from good to excellent. Introducing the new Sleep Score on Apple Watch. iPhone 11 or later required. Quiet riot.
Tristan, we hear in poll after poll that immigration comes out top as the issue of most concern to voters nationally. But when they're asked the question about themselves and their own community and their own lives, it is cost of living that comes out number one. And obviously we saw in America last year, that was very much an issue that, the price of eggs was a very, very, very key factor in the success of Donald Trump's campaign. Which of these two prevailing narratives do you think is most likely to be an electoral winner for a political party to run on? And is Labour trying to ride two horses at once, do you think, in trying to make both immigration and cost of living an issue and carving it up between the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary? Or is that the only way that they can do it because they are the government and you have myriad issues you've got to deal with at any one time?
I personally think that this government, if it's going to win next time out, does have to push forward on both of these fronts. I think that the primary one is cost of living. If people have money in their pocket and the economy's going well, then they are much more likely to stick with whoever's in power. But also, they're less likely to be looking for problems. And I think that there are forces within our politics of today that are willing to use immigration as a tool for complaining about all kinds of ills in society. And so immigration is to blame for the fact that we don't have as much money as we want to. Immigration is to blame for pressure on our services, etc., etc. it's a false and defeating narrative as far as I'm concerned. But it is now firmly established as a problem issue within our society, and so the government can't simply ignore it and just say we're going to fix the economy, because it now won't go away. And you've got a political party that is looking potentially dominant, where that's their only real viable issue. They've yet to establish themselves, this is reform obviously, as anything credible on the economy. When they make announcements in the areas that I'm looking at, crime and justice, at the moment they don't really make an awful lot of sense. They're populist statements, so they will
Give us an
draw
example.
Well, I mean, they talk about, there was a lot of announcements during the summer about shoplifting. You noticed that was a crime that suddenly shot to prominence. And there was a lot of statements pretending about the state of shoplifting and how it's tackled. Nigel Farage stood up in a press conference and he said in terms that anybody stealing something which is valued under £200, basically there's no consequences. Not only is that not true, but he was stood next to one of his politicians who was, until very recently, a CPS prosecutor who had actually prosecuted cases of low-level shoplifting where items less than £200 have been stolen. So he was making those kinds of statements to build this false narrative. And then when that's the sand that you're building your policy on, then nothing else makes any sense. His commitment to funding the courts and the way that justice is going to be done is making similar mistakes as past political parties have done, where you focus all of your attention on police officers and you focus no attention on the court system that is currently in disarray.
Adding to a backlog again.
Well, exactly. And both Reform and the Conservatives are, as far as I can tell, conscientiously ignoring what's actually the reality of the prison surface. The prisons are full, and yet these political parties will not only criticise Labour for taking action to try to make them less full, which involves letting people out of prison early, not sending as many people to prison, but then they will also make announcements to say we're going to recruit thousands of new police officers, which necessarily means more people will go to prison, and we're going to be tough on crime generally, which means lots more people going to prison and for longer.
Kenny, you need to help me out here, because Tristan's right. The framing of all of this around cost of living and it making it incredibly easy to blame others when you are struggling to pay the rent, pay your energy bills, pay for the groceries at the till. And it's feeding into this sense of loss of control over your life. But how in God's name do we still not have politicians prepared to stand up and explain the economic reality that migration helps boost economic growth, that they are net contributors, that they are job creators, that they are doing the jobs in our ailing public services that Brits either can't or won't do? Why do we have to end up in a situation where we are led by a notionally socially democratic government, but who is prepared to adopt the language of their far-right competitor in the polls?
These two issues, cost of living, immigration, they are polar opposites in one very important respect. People, all people, give a damn about cost of living because it genuinely matters to them. People care about immigration because they are told it's important. Now, that's very, very different. And that gets to the heart of this issue.
But that's my point. Why are they not being told the opposite? Why are they not being told why the ECHR protects all of us? Why are we not being told that immigration has helped boost economic growth almost more than any other lever in a government's arsenal over the last 30 years?
Look, do you want the truth or something beautiful? The truth is that Farage is absolutely brilliant at this sort of messaging. It's what took Britain out of Europe. His ability to stand up and tell half-truths and do it in a very, very engaging way and headline-friendly way is unrivaled in politics in this country right now, whether we like to hear that or not. On the other side of the communications divide right now is the government, who are poor at very best. And they're boring, you know? I mean, I have an issue with politicians being boring. You're not going to get the attention of people who are being shouted at by the likes of Farage or the rabble-rousing Tommy Robertson crew. You're just not going to get their attention if you've got a whole bunch of boring people saying boring things.
Okay, so who is the least boring out of Shabana Mahmood, Wes Streeting, Angela Rayner and Andy Burnham?
Cool, I'd take Angela Rayner. I think Burnham would give them a good run for the money, but my goodness me. And we know, Rayner is going to stay on manoeuvres until such times as she's back on the front line, isn't she?
Yep.
And I would never, ever accuse her of being boring. Controversial, yes. Willing to shoot from the hip, yes. But I think she's a cracking example of a politician who, with the right team around her, doing, this sounds very condescending, but doing some of the grown-up stuff. She's an experienced operator, but with the right team around her, she could become what is absolutely needed, which is a figurehead. Somebody who does pop up and say things that have to be stuck in the news headlines because they're engaging, they're interesting, they're relevant to people, and they're not boring. And this stuff shouldn't be boring. This is the stuff of life. It's literally the stuff of life, whether you are whichever side of the debate you're on. And I think we've suffered, I suppose, partly because Boris Johnson kind of took the circus into Downing Street and put some of us off the idea of the showman as Prime Minister. But we've gone to the other extreme. There's been that overcorrection that so often happens, where we've gone from that end of the scale to the Starmer end, the very technocratic, and as you say, the guy who was supposed to set things up for another leader to take the reins. I just think that we need a little bit more, and this is going to sound really shallow, but a little bit more show business. Not Trump show business, not Johnson show business, but good, solid communication that grabs the attention and explains to people why the hell these things are important. So, Naomi, what's the call to action on this really very tricky topic? What have you got for us?
Well, given everything that's happened this week, I think we need to ask listeners to show some love and support to migrants and refugees. And if you've not yet booked your Christmas party, whether that's your work one or your group of uni mates that you only ever see once a year for a Christmas thing, or you want to get a voucher-esque gift for somebody, then I'm going to point you in the direction of a charity called My Grateful. And they support migrants and refugees on their journey to integration. And they do cookery classes for the public. And it's a really great cause, really great people. And better than anything, it's really, really, really good food. Mm-hmm. So you can buy vouchers for people. You can organize a class as a get together for your mates. We'll put a link in the show notes. And they offer all sorts of things. You can have a Kurdish person, a Syrian person, a Ukrainian person teach you how to make a lovely meal from their cuisine. And it's a really, really great idea and way for everybody to get together and show some love and support for migrants. So you can find out more at mygrateful.org, link in the show notes, but do go and show refugees we care about them, value them, and most of all, welcome them.
Quiet riot.
And everybody is tired. All of the Ukrainians I know they've just kind of had enough. It's been remorseless. We've seen a massive uptick in bombing by Russia of Ukrainian cities over the New Year period: Kiev, Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Dnipro, and so on.
I'm Arthur Snell. I spent 2 decades as a British diplomat in places like Iraq, Afghanistan and Yemen. I ran the International Prevent programme for a while, and now I'm the host of the Behind the Lines podcast, where we get the leading experts on global issues, from Argentina to Zimbabwe, from places you hear a lot about like Ukraine and the Middle East, to things that we barely hear mentioned like Myanmar. My guests are informed, insightful and invaluable guides to what's happening in this crazy world.
Yeah, hi, I'm Christopher Steele.
I'm James Barr.
I'm Gaia Vince.
It's very, very clear that the amount of food being distributed from these centres is not enough.
I'm Dr. Emma Bryant.
I'm Dan Kazita.
Like a dog that chases a bus, you know, and then one day it catches the bus, it just runs headlong into that. What the hell do we do now? The sound of a dog actually catching up with a bus.
What we need to be talking about is fascism and how to challenge fascist ideas.
My name's Helena von Bismarck.
So I'm Zoe Gardner.
It's left Xi Jinping with a lifetime conviction that chaos is to be avoided at all costs.
I'm Emily Thornbury. I'm the Labour MP for Islington South and Finsbury, and I am now the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee.
I'm Romy Kukratsky. I'm the managing editor of the New Voice of Ukraine.
I don't think the West have any wish for Ukraine to win, because Ukrainian win means a collapse of Russia. What they want to bring balance back.
I say to my students, I think this is a moment very similar to when I was a student. The Cold War was ending, the Berlin Wall was falling, and it seemed like a moment of immense opportunity, but it was also a moment in which everything was changing quite dramatically.
Behind the Lines is your essential guide to the international scene. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
And now it's time for our weekly tour through the desperate, the dramatic, and the downright daft world of moral panic. It's time, of course, for Wokie Dokie.
Wokie Dokie.
Kenny, what outrage, stirred, shaken, and served with a garnish of disbelief have you unearthed for us this week?
Well, this week we've got the curious case of the evergreen tree. First out, shout out to a couple of our listeners, Emma Monk, hello, and Anathema Device, or is it Anathema Devici from Brisbane? Anathema, thank you for flagging this nugget up. It's been in a few papers this week now, but it's too good not to share. So, our panic from the front line of the war on Christmas, brackets registered trademark, close brackets, began as these things often do with a blurry phone photo and a healthy dose of misplaced outrage. Picture it, you're pushing your trolley through Tesco, looking for seasonal plastic joy, and there they are. The words, evergreen trees. No mention of Christmas, just evergreen. The absolute horror, the betrayal, the manufactured culture war opportunity. And so begins the inevitable 3 stages of woke hysteria. Stage 1, we've got the discovery when some poor traumatized patriot spots a label, evergreen tree in a box, in the seasonal aisle. Fumble for the phone, take a picture, and within hours, it's rocketing around social media with captions like, Tesco cancels Christmas, and woke brigade strikes again. People are furious. They've declared emotional war on a fake tree with no religious iconography, and the fact that it doesn't say Christmas on the label is held up as proof that the entire Western tradition is being bulldozed by diversity managers and tofu. Susan Hall, the completely stable leader of the London Conservatives, shares the image a few hours later with
Are we
the
still
word...
in stage 1 here?
This is stage 1, but we're coming to the end of stage 1.
Okay.
It's about to burn out and drop off the bottom of the rocket, with Susan Hall helping it on its merry way. So she posts on Twitter, or X, with the words, no, Tesco, they are Christmas trees. Never minding the fact that Christmas trees actually have their roots in actual paganism. So then we get quickly to stage 2, which is the outrage machine. The usual suspects pile in, pundits, grifters, former MPs who now live stream from sheds, all clutching their pearls and ranting about traditions under siege. Someone on Talk TV or such like almost weeps live on air while comparing it to the fall of Rome, but with tinsel. Articles pop up with headlines like Tesco bans the word Christmas, despite nobody checking with Tesco or, looking more closely at the product in question, which is something that listener Emma Monk did do. That brings us to stage 3, which is, dun dun dun, the reality check. So she did the unthinkable, actually read the flipping box. It turns out the so-called evergreen tree is sold in a big cardboard box with the words, Merry Christmas, printed all over it, in all caps, with snowflakes and reindeer and probably glitter as well. Now, if any of you are foolhardy enough to venture into a supermarket right now, you're going to know very well that Christmas is very much a thing and has very definitely not been banned. And Last Christmas is still playing on the flipping loudspeakers, and you can't move for Christmas paper, Christmas pudding, and blooming Christmas trees. So, this week, Christmas trees are woke if and only if they're not properly identified as Christmas trees, but are masquerading as general festive ornamentation, albeit on a box.
Kenny,
with
is it not
floating
that
Merry
Tesco
Christmas
is
on it.
woke?
Tesco? Oh.
That
no, I
great
think
capitalist, practically a monopoly, depending on which part of the country you live in, organisation is now completely woke.
Do you know what? Everybody's flipping woke where this is concerned, aren't they? Everybody is woke. You don't have to do anything other than wake up in the morning and go and do a thing, and you will be condemned as woke. So yes, Tesco is also woke, but trees are woke, cardboard boxes are woke, and best of all, our listeners are woke, because they're the ones that pointed this out to us.
They did, and listeners, keep them coming in. Send them to quietriotpod@gmail.com.
On Monday this week, a former Olympic athletics coach appeared at Manchester Crown Court accused of 19 serious offences, including rape, child sexual abuse and coercive control. Jose Vicente Leva Modal denied the charges and will now face trial in 3 years, primarily because that's the earliest available suitable court date. Judge Nicholas Dean KC, who is the honorary recorder of Manchester, released him on bail and said the first available date for a trial would be the 4th of September in 2028. Judge Dean said, "It just can't be right that a case of this nature has to be adjourned until 2028, but that's beyond my control." Now, frankly, such a delay is obscene. It leaves the alleged victim in a horrible legal limbo while memories fade and lives are put on hold. The defendant also faces 3 difficult years with restrictions on his movements, an electronic tag, and without his passports while he waits for his day in court. It's really not something we should expect from a functioning justice system. But of course, increasingly, it seems that our criminal justice system is wheezing, is overloaded, and is absolutely flatlining at times under the burden of its own backlog. Now, Tristan, we've got you sitting there in the Old Bailey right now. So, as a court reporter, and you alluded to this earlier, do you see any evidence that things are getting worse? Or, let's be fair, better?
Well, I think that things have been getting steadily worse for several years. Before we go on to what it is now, it's good to go back to 2018, 2019, because things were all right then. I was a court reporter back then, and you would complain about the state of the building, issues to do with access, open justice, that kind of thing. So things weren't perfect, but you had a functioning system where a trial of somebody who's in custody would happen within custody time limits, 6 months, and if they were on bail, it'd be a bit longer. But you'd be looking at maybe 9 months to a year case coming on. There was enough court spaces. Then they started cutting back on sitting days of courts because there was an opportunity for cutbacks. Then the pandemic happened, and then things have just sort of spiraled out of control since then. So the criminal court, Crown Court backlog is now somewhere around 80,000, which is enormous. It's just a number if you're not familiar with the system. But in 2019, it was mid 30,000. That's a sort of a manageable system. And so now, like the case you were mentioning, 3 years, that's disgraceful, frankly, for a case of that source and seriousness. But you can scout around and find trials currently being set in a court in West London in December 2029. I'm expecting 2030 trial dates to be on the table soon. That's added into a system which was already in quite a lot of trouble to do with personnel. Not only do we have sort of less courts than we used to because we closed them, but the state of the system over the years in terms of budget cuts to legal aid, and just the general environment that people have to work in has meant that lawyers have basically upped and left and said, do you know what, it's not worth it to be in the criminal sphere. There's more money and better conditions in the civil courts. The judges have stopped, being recruited in the numbers that we needed. And so you have a system where basically, even with the best will in the world, they can't really just immediately start bearing down on the backlog. And that's, as I'm sure we'll come to, why people are now talking about drastic things.
Yeah. And I mean, the figures that you mentioned are really quite jaw-dropping. I saw government figures that suggested that 26% of Crown Court cases that you mentioned have been open for a year or more. That, more than a quarter of Crown Court cases now we can assume are going to take more than 12 months at the very best. At magistrates' courts, it's already up 25% on a year earlier. Those are figures from the beginning of this year. And I think more broadly, at the Crown Court backlog, adjusted for case complexity, is about 2.8 times larger than it was back in 2019, pre-pandemic. It's worth mentioning as an aside that in Scotland, the backlog of criminal cases at high and sheriff courts has come down significantly from its pandemic peak. It was over 43,000 around about 2022. It's down to under 18,000 by the middle of this year.
Wow, more than half.
Yeah, but even there, it's not yet at pre-pandemic normal levels. The most serious cases remain delayed from a long time, almost a year on average, which again has real consequences for victims, witnesses, and the accused. And there's a warning from up there, and it applies down in England and Wales as well. There's modelling being done that suggests that despite the numeric reduction that Scotland's enjoying, if that's the right word, the change in the sort of cases that are being held, there's more solemn cases, more serious cases starting to be held, and that increases the burden substantially.
Quiet Riot.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
Quiet Riot.
I have two bits of anecdata from friends who work in the system. One is a criminal barrister who has said that he is now being told some of his cases will be 2031. And I have a friend who is a judge who said that really dark things are happening. And this is not new, this is pre-pandemic as well, but all of a piece of the constraint that the CPS in particular are finding themselves under because of the backlog in the court, where incredibly serious sexual offences are settling out of court by pleading guilty to a lesser charge. So, using the example of somebody who had seriously, vaginally and anally raped a girl, underage girl, who then did a deal and said, okay, I'll plead guilty to having only used my hands on her. And that was, pushed for because it was going to take too long to get him on the sex offenders register by charging him with the thing he was going to deny through the court process. Sorry, Tristan, you're trying to come in there.
So I was just going to say that's not just isolated incidents and anecdotes. You definitely see that coming across. Two different phenomenons that I'm seeing on a regular basis. The first one is as a little acronym you can see on the court listings. It's PONE, which is the prosecution's offered no evidence, which is usually a good indication that something disastrous has happened to a case, and that disastrous thing is more often than not that the victim or the key witnesses has pulled out of the case. The second thing is we're familiar with plea bargaining, I think, in America. I personally think it sounds like a pretty grubby system. We don't have that here, but you are seeing these sort of quiet pressures being put on not only the victim to sort of accept a lesser charge, but also the defendant to maybe accept something that they wouldn't ordinarily do because they can't take 3 or 4 years of their life waiting for this to move on. So that's the sort of the phenomenon that happens. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not really justice. It's getting it done. So not really getting to the truth and what should really happen. And some of the courts are coming up with, what on the face of it are sensible suggestions, in that you've got this massive backlog. So they're thinking about bringing in cases en masse, say a Monday, list 40 trials that would ordinarily be 2 or 3 years into the future. And what it does is you list the case and you basically put a bit of pressure onto the defendant to say, is this going to be a guilty plea when we get to trial? Can we maybe fast track that process? Yeah. But you are running the risk, obviously, as good intentions as it might be, you're running the risk of exerting undue influence onto a defendant who doesn't want to plead guilty, but they think this is the sort of the best of a bad job. The reason I mentioned the American system, it's like plead guilty to a lesser offence, you get a couple of years probation, take it to trial, and you might do 20 years in prison. Well, there's an obviously massive pressure on somebody to plead guilty when, they might not have done it.
And we should remember that there's a whole convoluted process to go through before a case like this even gets to an initial hearing. I read a very good and short Substack by a fellow called Maximilian Hardy on this not too long ago, and he kind of ran through the process. A man is accused of a sexual offence. In this case, police have to launch an investigation. They have to interview people. They have to make an arrest. Then they have to question the suspect. They dig into other lines of inquiry. They dig out CCTV. Forensics get involved. There are statements from other witnesses, phone down logs, and then nothing. Then it can go quiet. Weeks can really very quickly become months. An investigating officer can move to another role. They've got careers as well. They could get sick, or they could even leave the police. Finally, a file after a whole heap of time might get sent to the CPS. A request will then bounce back for further inquiries. These months then become 2 years, 2.5 years. Eventually, perhaps the suspect is charged. At that point, he's brought before the court. And because of the case backlog, his trial's listed for 3 years away anyway, which means at the very best, it's going to be 5.5 years after the alleged offence before the accused is tried and before he is imprisoned or freed. If he's guilty, that's 5 years when the public was not being properly protected. And clearly, if he's innocent, it's 5 years out of his life as well. It's a horrible, horrible sentence on everybody involved, regardless of the outcome. One other point to make, Tristan, I think, is, our policing system's frequently beset by controversy. The wheels, as we've just been discussing, have come off the justice system. Our prisons are absolutely bursting at the seams as well. But what about the importance of justice being seen to be done? And in other words, where do you think court reporting is at in late 2025?
Well, a few years ago, a very wise person said something silly about the decline of court reporting, basically that it was in terminal decline. Full confession, it was me. And I regret that statement. It was at a conference because I didn't really set it in the right context. Right. I think I probably had a point. That there are declining numbers of people who are in and around the courts, and that's certainly true in London. There are also some fantastic regional court reporters around England and Wales, and obviously in Scotland I'm less familiar with, but who do a really good job of reporting on those courts. The point I was trying to make was that there are less specialist court reporters like my good self, who do this day in, day out. But there's been a sort of a shifting pattern, I think, in the media of less specialist court reporters, but more general reporters who are tasked with covering courts and crime. Now, that's not to say that there isn't still a problem. There is. There simply aren't enough people to cover every court. There are some around London where, it's a rare sighting of a reporter, if at all. And so the court staff are sometimes rather alarmed to see me when I turn up. Who are you? What are you doing here? Are you sure? Are you in the right place? Those kind of questions. But I think we have reached a stage that we should have a sensible conversation as a society and as a country about what it is we want from justice and how we're actually going to see it being done, because it cannot be simply the case that the media will cover all of the good stuff. They won't. It's just not going to be the case. They'll do, good work on big cases and uncover things that are very important. But there should be a role to be played by the court service itself in promoting what it's doing. I think that would actually help if the court service took a lead in saying, in a neutral way, in saying a judge has decided this, here's the judgment.
Right.
Let's publish that stuff. Let's broadcast more of the work of the courts so that people have a chance to see it. Let's push out these are the kinds of cases that are being heard, because it fills the gaps and helps to maybe counter some of the disinformation that is being actively promoted around justice at the moment.
And most of the problems that we've talked about on the show today, from crumbling concrete of the actual buildings, closures of the courts, the overload of the CPS, backlog, etc., can be directly linked to austerity and cut after cut after cut to the justice system in the UK. But on the reporting side of it, and I don't know where you cut your teeth, but so many journalists, usually in days gone by, began their beat on a local rag where covering what was happening in the local magistrates' court or county court was a really important part of local reporting for the local community, to shine a spotlight on justice issues in their area. And with the gutting of those, and that's largely been private sector driven, you've got AI article after AI article appearing on what are now pretty much predominantly online only local newspapers. And to what extent do the media companies have to take some responsibility for this lack of reporting on justice issues?
Well, I think there's a degree of responsibility, but then the flip side is that they've made it harder for local papers to actually do that job. I started my journalism career in Harrow in northwest London, and I did report on the Magistrates' Court, on the Crown Court. The newspaper I worked for is not what it was. And so, yes, newspapers have been gutted in that way in certain areas. And so they presumably don't have the staff to be able to keep up that kind of coverage. But on the flip side, Harrow Magistrates' Court no longer exists. Harrow Crown Court, as I said earlier, is covered in scaffolding and closed. So if you want to cover a Harrow local case, you might have to go to Southwark to actually cover it. Well, that's not
Snaresbrook or somewhere.
That's not sustainable for a local newspaper to do. I'll put in a good word, actually, that some of the local newspaper groups in recent times have actually really dedicated resources into court reporting, appointing specialist reporters to go and do it, recognising that it's bizarre that local newspapers have done less and less of this kind of thing, because frankly, these are the stories that readers click on the most. So it makes sense to actually make that a priority.
It's just another example of when we say a communications problem, it pays to look further up the chain just to find out whether or not it is a communications problem, or, as you've seen in Harrow, a much, much more serious issue that's well beyond the remit of a local newspaper reporter.
If I may just jump onto my personal hobby horse for a second, that this I never get to say this in any other format because nobody cares, frankly. But the court service and the Ministry of Justice have just gone through this enormously expensive transformation program for all of their computer systems. Part of it, they've made it incredibly difficult for journalists covering the courts to access and use information, daily court lists, information on who's charged with what and what's happened to those cases. So it's an unseen problem, but it really is quite serious, because what it does is it has the effect of putting reporters off from doing that basic job. It should be easy as pie to go into courts, find out what the charges are, report on the case. But it's actually a web of spreadsheets and information systems that have been designed by somebody who, frankly, can't have cared that much about open justice.
Kenny, give us a call to action. How can people get involved in even tinkering at the seams of trying to help improve the justice system across the country?
Well, this stuff is important. And if you want to help the people who were shouting long before we noticed the prison roof was on fire, just check out the groups who are leading the charge. the Howard League for Penal Reform, Transform Justice, the Prison Reform Trust, the Justice UK. These are the folk doing the policy work, the advocacy, and the public shaming that actually moves the dial. I'll drop some links in the show notes. You don't need to be a lawyer to care. You just need to be a citizen who doesn't want to live in a country where the justice system is held together by apology emails and zip ties.
And make sure that you're following Tristan on social media too.
Quiet Riot.
And now, for our weekly moment of unashamedly good news, proof that humanity isn't entirely hopeless, it's time for Grin and Share It.
Good news is welcome to me. Bad news is hell come to me. Good news. I want good news.
Naomi, what nugget of joy are you unleashing on our listeners' eardrums this week?
Okay, well, who doesn't like watching mountain goat videos on YouTube? No one,
Okay.
Kenny, that's who. And among those who I've found are taking inspiration from them is the Japanese motor company Toyota. And this is a story about tech for good, which in these days of perilous AI bubbles and evil tech CEO bullies is a rare thing indeed. So Toyota are completely rethinking mobility for those of us who use or might at some future point use wheelchairs. They've been inspired by our four-legged climbing goat friends. And they got thinking, what if we ditch the wheels on wheelchairs for legs? And they've designed this really remarkable four-legged chair that can climb stairs and basically kind of walk a non-mobile person around, making things like getting in and out of a vehicle much easier. And presumably then they'll have a nice adapted Toyota to sell them as well. They debuted it at the 2025 Japan Mobility Show. And my God, check out that website if you want to see some insanely incredible, innovative, futuristic stuff. But the chair, it even looks cool. Like it looks like a bit of modernist mid-century furniture you would like to, put in your own home. And it's like an ergonomic seat mounted on four mechanical legs that have got joints in them, like knees and ankles. And it basically mimics some of the surest footed animals on Earth, the mountain goat. So they called it the Walk Me. And each leg can like bend in multiple ways, lift, move independently of the other legs to ensure that stability is maintained while walking over uneven ground, around obstacles, upstairs. And they've covered it with a really nice, soft, friendly looking material that hides all the mechanical components. And I think it can run for about 24 hours before needing to be recharged. And the real showpiece, of course, is when it climbs stairs. So one of the legs tests out the step's height to determine how far the other legs are going to have to push up to reach it. And then it's got all these sensors and a LiDAR system that's continually scanning the surround for obstacles or potential banana skins or a children's toy that might have been left halfway upstairs so that it doesn't trip. And I don't want to mismanage expectations. It's not ready for rollout yet. So, those of you in wheelchairs right now, you're not going to be able to go out and get one, but hopefully it's coming soon. It is still in development, but I am just really excited and glad that we've got a piece of innovative technology that might just be able to do some genuine good in the world. And because that made me grin, Kenny, I thought I'd share it.
That is fabulous. And do you know what I like best about that? For the last few years, every so often on my social media feed, there's a video will pop up of one of those RoboDog things that look like the end of the world. They're horrible and terrifying. You take the technology on a step, you find a way of making the batteries last longer, and you make sure the legs are strong enough to support a human. And all of a sudden, these lethal RoboDogs become wheelchairs. I mean, that's phenomenal. Yeah. I will stick a link in the show notes for anybody who wants to find out more about that, because I love that story as well.
Quiet Riot.
And that's it from our Alex-free episode. But don't worry, he is going to be back very, very soon. In the meantime, an enormous thank you to Tristan for finding a quiet corner of the Old Bailey to join us once again.
Thanks so much for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Always a pleasure, Tristan. We'll be back with Sunday School as usual for our weekend listeners. Oh, and if our festive stories have put you in the gifting mood, head over to ko-fi.com/quietriotpod and back us for as little as £5 a month so we can keep this little show as a podcasty gift for everyone, whether they can afford to pay or not.
We love you all very, very much. Bye.
Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Rees.
Quiet Riot.